Hi everyone, I'm Sunyup. I'm a PhD candidate in Information Studies at the University of Maryland, and today I'll be talking on behalf of our team, Anna, Michael, and Jessica, on our paper, Nobody's Happy, Deriving Design Insights from Smart Home Power Users on how to improve data transparency, visibility, and control in smart homes. I wanted to start off talking about our paper with a quote of our participant that really captures our idea. I think we're in this really weird state where specific to smart home technology, it's a little too basic for the IT technology nerds and a little too complex for the run-of-the-mill user. So nobody's happy, hence our paper title. So we're going to talk about how to bridge the gap between the so-called IT technology nerds and the run-of-the-mill user. To give you a little bit of context, so in the smart home privacy and security literature, we've been talking about how smart home devices poses new threats to users because they collect a wide range of data, ranging from data logs on your smart lights to personally identifiable data such as audio and video data from your smart cameras and smart speakers. And it's more concerning because not only these devices collect data from your shared spaces like living rooms, they also collect data from private and intimate spaces such as bedrooms and bathrooms. Some of the literature talks about how to increase smart home data transparency, visibility, and control, such as the IoT privacy nutrition label and IoT inspector that I will be talking about later in my findings. But all of these literature points to the fact that as smart home devices grow in capability and grow more in popularity, we really need to think about multiple devices, multiple users, and diverse stakeholders. So having this in mind, we were really interested in talking to a specific subset of users, which we call privacy-conscious power users. What we mean by privacy-conscious power users is that these users have privacy and security in their minds. That's top of their goal when they're trying to use these devices. And they're power users because they're enthusiastic about using smart home technologies in innovative and creative ways. So we conducted focus groups with 32 privacy-conscious power users, asking about the difficulties they face when they try to make their smart home private and secure, and based on those experiences, how they might imagine to improve design features in privacy and security in smart homes. Our participants mostly consisted of white male in their mid-30s, and since they were power users, they used multiple devices, with smart lights and smart speakers being one of the most popular devices. And since they had to use multiple devices, they used integrated platforms. And because they were privacy conscious, more than half of our participants opted into using Apple HomeKit because they wanted to make their smart home private and secure. And I'll talk about this later in my findings. Last characteristic of our participants is that half of our participants engage in what we call advanced network management, which means that they are using Pi-holes, multiple routers, private DNSs, and firewalls to make their home network secure. So having this in mind, let's go into the findings. So we found that our participants really strive to balance between functionality and usability, and while trying to do this, they face trade-offs because these two were often conflicting needs. When I talk about functionality, I'm talking about interoperability, making these devices work together, and also customizability. But they also knew that this really conflicts with usability when thinking about multiple users, non-power users. So this is why a lot of participants opted into using HomeKit because they thought that HomeKit Apple was more private and secure. But choosing Apple comes with some limitations. Apple is a walled garden, meaning that they don't really let other smart home devices work together. And also, they use really nice, simple user interfaces, but it also doesn't really let users tinker with your devices. So one of our participants talks about the sacrifice between functionality, even spending more money to be in a more private environment. To overcome these limitations, our participants had to trade off their privacy and security needs into using non-Apple brands, or also or leveraging their technical skills to use third-party open source integration platforms. So P4 talks about how P4 chose Amazon despite privacy and security concerns over Apple because of the capabilities that these smart home devices provided. P21 also talked about how frustrating it was to incorporate Nest Thermostat into HomeKit and failed to do so, and ended up using Home Assistant to bridge all these devices together. Our next finding is that we found that our participants wanted data transparency in multiple consumer touchpoints. And they talked about incremental design improvements, such as information from objective sources that they can trust, and also information about company and brand structures, because they knew that these devices change their data practices or privacy policies, which eventually impact their decision-making in terms of privacy and security. So a lot of our participants actually talked about privacy security labels on IoT devices and having them, for example, on device packaging. And then also connecting that information available online, so as in websites, and also in different smart home devices apps. They also emphasized this notification system, so that could remind them to review the data practices and privacy policies of these devices from time to time. Our next finding is on visibility of devices and data. Our participants wanted visibility of their devices and smart home data, but they emphasized that these had to be in a centralized, visualized tool. Many of our participants talked about an example of Apple HomeKit router, which is on the right side of the slide, talking something about this. So this is an example what our participants wanted. And in this kind of centralized tool, they wanted device location, they wanted status of their devices, they wanted commands and controls available to them. And they knew that this is a lot of information and a lot of data, so they emphasized the role of filter functions and filter mechanisms to organize all of this devices, data and information. P19 talks about HomeKit router. What it does, it offers important in the sense that it gives you a control panel of all of your devices, and each device has the option to communicate with your network, restrict it, or let it communicate freely. So talking about an example of a centralized visualization tool. Next is data control. Our participants wanted to control their smart home data, and they wanted to do this in monitoring and controlling their network management. So they talked about creating white and black lists, allowing or denying networks coming in and through their home network, and also creating notifications based on those lists. So having a reminder or alert of unwanted activities in your home. In fact, a lot of our participants actually used what I said in the previous slide, pie holes, to manage their network already. For example, P25 talks about, I went and just blacklisted unnecessary endpoints from my router so that it can only talk within my network, but it can't reach out and talk to anybody outside. What we learned about with talking with power user is that it was surprising that how much they thought about non-power users and how much they thought about making these devices and design features usable for non-power users. So for example, when we are talking about data transparency, they talked about the privacy nutrition labels for IoT devices, and they also mentioned this concept of layered labels, which is to provide a summary statement of the data practices of the devices for the people who are just looking into the device, and also a detailed information for those who are interested, because they knew that not everyone is privacy conscious as they are. And when they talked about a centralized visualization tool, they talked about this because that they knew that right now, smart home ecosystem, they call it a smattering of ecosystems, meaning that different brands, different platforms, companies, manufacturers are using their devices in different apps. And they knew that non-power users would not want to. They don't want to use a lot of multiple apps to manage their smart homes. That's why they stress the importance of a centralized visualization tool. Last but not least, when they're talking about creating black and white lists, allowing or denying certain types of domain, they knew that non-power users would not be able to parse out different domain lists as they do. So what they talked about is maybe manufacturers or companies creating a default black and white list so that non-power users can use and build on to build their privacy preferences. I wanted to end my talk with talking a little bit about policy. The things that we talked about here today in our study, making smart home data transparent, visible, and controllable, is only possible when we have the information from the companies. So it's important that policies and regulations mandate companies to provide this information in the first place. And when we think about smart homes growing further in the future, smart home ecosystem will be only more complex and more important to do this. So P17 talks about this, the question of how do we balance doing more of this, adding more devices, without being a user burden in terms of using the devices or making your home private and secure. Because we still want to make sure that we're keeping our stuff private as much as possible in this day and age. In fact, industry standards such as Matter really helps this effort. So Matter was released a couple of months ago. It's an industry standard protocol that runs over different protocols that the smart home devices work on. And this protocol, industry standard lets us possible that overcome the interoperability issues our participants talks about, or it could be a stepping stone to building a centralized visualization tool that our participants really wanted. So this kind of effort would make us try to bridge the gap between power users and non-power users alike, and hopefully we can make all smart home device users happy. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to questions.